After a near-perfect debut era with Sour that saw 4 top 10 hits, 3 Grammys, 2 number ones, and 1 teenage Disney star ascend to pop royalty, many wondered where Olivia Rodrigo would take her career. The biggest question on everyone's mind was if Olivia was going to suffer from the dreaded sophomore slump. It is a phenomenon that not too many artists ever really overcome. Would this be a thank you situation of one-hit era wonder, or would it be a teenage dream? With the release of Guts, her second studio record, the answer is pretty clear. Olivia is here to stay. You know the drill. I'll give you a really quick era recap before we do a deep dive into each track and the bigger themes of the record before I give it a score. The Guts era so far. Sour was an unprecedented success, setting many records and dominating the pop conversation in 2021. It was the first debut album to have 2 separate songs debut at number 1. It was universally acclaimed for being a very strong, focused debut album and scored 7 Grammy nominations overall. Sour really resonated with Gen Z lyrically and aesthetically, but the sheer sincerity of the record as well as its universal emotions and themes about coming of age, those I think allowed her to really cross over into the general public. Rodrigo would go on to win Best New Artist as well as Best Pop Vocal Album and Best Pop Solo Performance for Sour and Driver's License, her debut single. On top of that, she promoted the album with a concert film, the Sour Prom, and her own Disney Plus documentary, Driving Home to You, which featured new arrangements of songs from Sour. Rodrigo closed out the Sour era with a sold-out tour that focused on smaller venues because she doesn't skip steps and only covered North America and Europe, but that didn't stop scalpers from reselling tickets for thousands of dollars. In spite of all of that success, there was still controversy over publishing credits regarding 2 big singles off the record. Deja Vu, one of my personal favorites off Sour, initially was just credited to Rodrigo and her go-to producer Dan Nigro. However, after comments that Rodrigo made about it being a homage to Taylor Swift's now iconic Cruel Summer, Swift, Antonoff, and St. Vincent Sandy Clark now have credits. Likewise, Rodrigo's smash hit, Good For You, which many noted sounded very similar to Paramore's Misery Business, saw Josh Farro and Hayley Williams added to the credits. Credits can be a costly situation, with Billboard estimating both Rodrigo and Nigro losing millions by not arbitrating, because you just don't fight Taylor Swift and Paramore on your debut era. Rodrigo would comment that this experience was a learning moment for her about the business. I only note this because the experience probably helped drive the creative process of Guts. Nigro and Rodrigo really took their time to lean into what worked on Sour, particularly the pop rock sound that fans really liked. The first single, Vampire, which debuted at number 1, was a stunning piano ballad that evolves midway into a rock opera takedown of a predatory ex. It's a brilliant comeback single showing growth. Her second single, Bad Idea Right, floored me. This 90s pop punk ode to seeing an ex you shouldn't is a Frankenstein together smash, pulling together a chatty chorus, talky rap verses, and an undeniable killer attitude I haven't seen in mainstream pop since Charli XCX's Sucker. Both of these singles really hyped me up for the record, and even got Best New Track on Pitchfork. At the time of this recording, the album has a higher Metacritic than Sour, but what do I think? The album review. The big question people have is Guts better than Sour? Honestly, for me it is. My complaints on Sour were mostly about how ballad heavy it was, how it needed to have more edge and personality. Guts really flips the equation. Its production is sonically dynamic at the cost of its cohesion. Each track has its own contained atmosphere and energy. Where Sour portrays her as an unsure, plucky upstart experiencing many firsts, Guts paints her as a rock star who's a bit more jaded but still shares intimate and vulnerable details, just with more bite. One thing I didn't realize until this record is how funny Olivia is. Some of these lines cracked me up. One line on Get Him Back about wanting to meet a guy's mom just to tell her that he sucks gagged me. If Brutal felt like a surprise slap on Sour, this album is filled with punches. On a thematic level, Guts feels more scattered than Sour. It's not focused on Rodrigo's growing fame or specific romance. It feels like a random yet honest look into Rodrigo's mind. The mounting anxieties of growing up, making mistakes, and finding her footing in a world that's honestly out to get us all. She's described this as a time capsule, and that alone helps explain why this album feels more like an outline of her life rather than an actual story. The current track listing feels somewhat random, but also perfect in a messy way. Fans of the slower, contemplative ballads still get fed. There are 4 solid, devastating, emotional, piano-driven ballads on here. Guts doesn't really quite reinvent Rodrigo's sound, but it feels feels like a refinement. Think of how Apple used to upgrade iPhones. They do a killer upgrade and then an S version, which kind of adds some new features while perfecting the phone before it. Guts is Sour's S phone. Why fix what wasn't broken to begin with? Though I do think Olivia is planting seeds for her next big project here. The album starts with All American Bitch, Brutal's older, hotter, worn-down sister. The opening chords had a striking similarity to Lady Gaga's Joanne, which really spooked me. It begins with a Kraft reference setting up these contradictions. One I liked was built like a mother and a machine. That couplet really alludes to how Sour built her to be this relatable artist who needed to be perfect but human. Then we get this roaring chorus that really sets up a core idea about her age and how she acts. The contrast between the delivery of her verses sounding nearly angelic and the brash chorus's production signifies the tightrope that young women have to really navigate as role models and the rage of having to do that. The bridge is the surrender to anger where she screams in a very wet leg your mom way. The final lines are a really slick allusion to Lana Del Rey's iconic Pretty When I Cry from Ultraviolence, a similarly harsh sophomore record. The transition to Bad Idea Right with the knocking and answering along with the rewind sound is really cinematic. Olivia says that this song started as a joke about hooking up with an ex, which explains how funny it is. The verses are chatty, like she's recapping a story over the phone with a friend. I find that the refrain with the ah and probably not so hooky. The pre-chorus gradually building really sells this idea of someone who's pretending to have doubt, but the chorus's resigned nature, even saying that she tripped and fell into his bed, that clues us into the fact she doesn't really care. Towards the end, we see the production unravel during the bridge, like we're watching a tape unwind and get stuck. It's that detail and texture Nigro does that really elevates Rodrigo's concepts. It was such a smart single choice. Speaking of singles, Vampire's no slouch. There's speculation that this song is not about what we think it is, but I do think that this song is about her relationships with Adam Faze and Zach Villa, particularly because of the release date for Faze and just the metaphor of a vampire. Villa was particularly described as a professional nightlife partier. Rodrigo, who is a huge Twilight fan herself, really plays with the mythology, but the lines bloodsucker fame fucker will always live in my heart. They are a stake in the heart each time. What I really like is the production evolving and changing much like a transformation. It's very smart. The bridge itself is just as hooky as the chorus, which on paper looks very dense but floats well if you try to sing along with it. Her vocals have really improved. Lacey's a truly perplexing track. It took me a few listens to really understand it. It's this obsessive ode to Lacey, this gorgeous theoretical girl that Olivia's just jealous of because she's got the one thing she wants and her stomach's all in knots. Dazzling starlet, Bardot incarnate. It's so affectionate in its hatred that it reads a little queer to me. It feels like she's in love with Lacey herself, but she doesn't realize it. The outro convinces me of this because, honestly, I despise my rotten mind and how much it worships you. I feel like it's a question of, do I want to be her or do I want to be with her? I don't think I'm sorry. Ballad of a Homeschooled Girl returns us to more self-deprecating pop rock. This track's probably the funniest track on the record. It's got classic social anxiety at a party, messing up the whole night, and just being cringe. It is McLovin's theme song. The chorus alludes to Mean Girl's lines about mathletes being social suicide. Verse 2 is the real star of the show, the idea of her googling how to flirt only to talk to a hot guy who ends up being gay, and the line, every guy I like is gay, is so based. I saw so many people dragging it out of context without listening to the song, and I have to say, it really is more of a self-own than anything. I found it odd that there was no bridge, but the outro where she really thought that someone's mom was their wife and she sings how she cannot come up with a third line, that really cracked me up. Making the Bed is one of my favorite deep cuts, which surprised me. This mid-tempo confessional is about self-realization that she's made her bed, aka her life, and now she's got a lie in it. Verse 1's about the music industry, the business of public perception, and how it sucked the fun out of all of it. The chorus laments the realness of her friends and how even great things feelings don't ring true to her anymore. Verse 2 really did get me though. Her nightmares about losing control of her life, she really worries that her fans see her as a tourist attraction, and how she's letting the label control her. These are real come to Jesus moments written into a song. Logical is kind of like the album's climax in a sense. It is a ballad, an earworm of a piano piece about how irrational love is. It did remind me a bit of Favorite Crime, but with more focus, yet somehow more abstract and mature. The chorus itself alludes to George Orwell's 1984 with the 2 + 2 = 5 line. In that book, lies become truths because people are so convinced they are real. As the song progresses, we get darker and darker details and the truth about how her ex was truly the worst. The bridge contains some of the coldest lines said in this album. I was too young, I was too soft, can't take a joke, can't get you off. It feels like a sequel to Vampire, like the aftermath of Crushing Anger, Cold Sorrow. Julia Michaels co-writing on this track really made sense. It still has Olivia's voice, but I could sense like an additional presence on it. Get Him Back is apparently the third single, and for good reason. This track reunites Liv with Alexander 23 and marks her first collaboration with Ian Kirkpatrick. The track has a very clipped texture to it. It is bubble grunge. The verses reminded me of an early Kesha. Much like the album itself, it's very contradictory. The chorus itself is a double entendre. Does she want him back? Does she want revenge? Verse 2 sounds so glib, but reading it made me so sad. She reels it back with humor with that line, but I am my father's daughter, her dad's a therapist, so maybe I could fix him. But the bridge here is really genius. You can see the push and pull, you can really hear it. She wants to meet his mom just to tell her that her son sucks. The closing outro with the I'll get hims is a really nice callback to Blondie's One Way or Another. I can't believe she almost scrapped this. Love is Embarrassing is a back-to-back banger. The energy and the title reminded me of Dan Niger's previous collaborator Sky Ferreira, a high compliment. I will say that it is a bit short, but it is this blast of energy where she really glides on the instrumental. The verses aren't as funny or as stunning as the other tracks, but the chorus's rhyme scream of embarrassing, second string, mentioning, it just feels so satisfying. The production on Here's the Star, the switch up on the bridge and the outro with the cheerleadery chant is a deft touch. Okay, now it's time to talk about The Grudge, which I think is a very layered song. On first glance, you're really tempted to take it at face value as just another romantic ballad about heartbreak, but there is an intentional vagueness to it. It's not quite as direct as songs on Sour would be. Traitor was one of my favorites for being this clean, simple waltz, but this one's very complex. Not to stoke speculative flames, but I really couldn't help that this was a track pointed more towards a mentor or hero figure. Lines like, I can't let it go, I've tried, call back a certain trio of I tries that I've heard from another certain other songwriter that I adore. This one's a grower for me. I will revisit it with a different take each time. The bridge really does take away my breath. On a lighter note, I have seen some very stunning edits for the ship Belly Conrad, which I support. Anyone who watches The Summer I Turned Pretty, I do think of them when I hear this song too. Pretty Isn't Pretty is a standout for me, just in the fact that it's a nice detour away from romantic betrayal for a genuine, catchy, reflective track about self-image. It's not going to win any lyric awards, but we love when a pop girl realizes capitalism is also ruining their life. This song feels like a mature sequel to Jealousy, Jealousy, except here the blame is shifted from people to the system itself. The chord progression felt eerily similar to Katy Perry's Ghost, something that I noticed because I'm editing my Prism video for next month. The album Closer Teenage Dream feels like a conclusion to both Guts and Sour itself. It's this soft piano track that really strips down to be about her thoughts about getting older. Where's My Teenage Dream becomes I'm sorry I couldn't always be your teenage dream. Each verse poses these questions about how she'll feel when she's no longer this young ingenue with this pedestal. The chorus acknowledges that she has her whole life ahead of her, but questions if she's already peaked. The bridge itself feels like a self-assurance until she ends with this question, it gets better, but what if I don't? A very somber conclusion that I think she'll revisit next album and throughout her career. Hope You're Okay always felt like a check-in with her audience. Now it kind of feels like an invite to check in with her. My last note on that song has to be how it ends with a conversation with Dan and his daughter Saoirse, zooming out to show that everyone else has grown a lot too since her last record and will continue to. Overall, I think Guts isn't a quantum leap from Sour, but rather a very smart and well-constructed deconstructed sequel that plays on the previous strengths while pushing boundaries just enough to feel a little new. One of my notes from Sour was I was worried that she wasn't going to find a voice, and while I'm not entirely sure she's found something that is completely uniquely hers, she has improved vocally and with her delivery undeniably. As always, it's so refreshing seeing a Filipino-American artist topping the charts and staking a claim in the pop space. With the teenage saga coming to a close, I'm curious where she'll go, both lyrically and sonically, as we continue watching her grow up. I'm awarding this album an early 9 out of 10. I would like to hear the deluxe tracks to see what was cut or what's to come. I will be looping this for months. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I did a review for Sour. It was one of my last videos in 2021 before I took an extended hiatus. So it's nice to cover Olivia while I'm still pretty active and constantly posting. A quick shout out to my members, my subscribers. Comment below your top 3 favorite tracks, or maybe a track you weren't feeling. I love discussing music with you. I cannot wait to see you guys in the comments. I will see you next video.